I think it was David Thoreau that once said, when it comes to employment, most men live lives of quiet desperation. I think there's a lot of truth to that. I've been there. I remember for years spending time in labs and overseeing, automation of testing of software and things like that, and not really liking the job very much.
This is Leaders 24/7, Episode 1. I'm your host, Gordon Whitehead. Our guest today is David Stirling, a founding executive, chief executive officer, and president of doTERRA, a worldwide health and wellness company headquartered in the heart of Utah Valley. David is one of the individuals responsible for having grown this company from a startup idea to a place that now employs over 1,300 people and engages over 1 million wellness advocates. David's journey is an interesting one, and I know our listeners will benefit from his experience. Well, David, I know you're a busy person, and I really want to thank you for joining us. So here's our first question. I'm sitting here in an impressive award-winning building, and I think we owe it to everyone that's listening for you to tell us just a little bit about doTERRA.
My pleasure to be here with you today, Gordon, and to be able to share a little bit. doTERRA, this is a new campus. We haven't even been in it a year yet, and we've already launched into a phase 2 that was just completed here a couple of weeks ago, and it has grown quickly. We now have some 13 to 1,400 employees here at this campus, and about another 350, 400 in our international offices around the world. It's grown quickly. doTERRA as a company is barely 7 years old, and it's sprung up and really flown under the radar for some time, I guess, but it's sprung up very quickly. It's very popular among a lot of segments now in our society.
So our listeners are probably going to be really interested in how someone becomes a CEO of such a fast-paced company, a dynamic organization. If you were to give some advice to a young person coming out of college, say, or a new manager who has on their long-term goal sheet, I want to be a C-level officer in a company, how do you help them?
First of all, I might question it just a little bit. Are you sure you want to do that? You pick up one end of that stick, you pick up the other, and there's a lot of responsibility. If you carry that title, certainly there's an expectation. You've got to do the rest of the job. And thrilling, exciting, but it comes with a lot of commitment as well. When I set out in my career initially, and I don't know if I looked and thought about being a CEO of a company at some point or not, I don't really remember. But if I did, it was probably a very vague and ambiguous concept and picture that I really had no idea how one got there at the time.
So how did you get here then?
Well, and I could talk a little about that journey. As I look back on my career over the last, 25 years or so, you do need to pay your dues. It's surprising to me sometimes when people want to try to skip some of that. And, during that first 10 years in particular, I remember reading all the time, voraciously. At lunch, I would typically go out in my car somewhere, have a sack lunch with me, and I would be either reading a book or reading, an excerpt or a speech or something from someone I admired. Typically strong leaders and successful types of people, and I read and I read and I read and I read and I read. As you go along, I suppose you take pieces from each one that resonate with you, that seem to make sense to you. And I did. I spent a lot of that first 10 years, my lunch periods were usually on my own, reading and really studying others that I admired for one reason or another.
So you've invested a lot in yourself, and you took those quiet times to make sure you're continuing to improve yourself.
It was, and like I said, I don't know that I was doing it necessarily with a view of trying to reach, high-level executive position, but it was something that I did for a long time, just wanting to understand, realizing that I lacked a lot. I remember early in my career having an opportunity. At one point, I was managing a lot of people, a lot of engineers at the time, and all of a sudden being flung into a position where I was part of a strategic team. And I quickly, as I rubbed shoulders with executive-level people, I remember coming to the realization very quickly that I had become very good tactically, very good at executing and on a tactical basis, but I was very much lacking in strategic skills and ability. I remember that being even a fear of a realization that came over me, and realizing that I needed to gain a whole new set of skills.
So how did you go about then improving your ability to be a strategic thinker, a strategic leader?
Well, first of all, avoiding that desire to make that jump too quickly. I'll tell young people sometimes that talk to me, or even some of my, other leaders and managers that I work with here in the company, is you have to pay your dues. People that skip that piece of paying their dues will really struggle one day when they hit executive management. It seems to be important at some phase in your career of being down in the trenches, turning the screws, so to speak, shoveling the dirt, and doing it long enough to really appreciate. I suppose there's a couple of reasons for that. One, it teaches you the nuts and bolts of things. Two, it teaches you what other people are experiencing and going through. I think it was David Thoreau that once said, when it comes to employment, most men live lives of quiet desperation. I think there's a lot of truth to that. I've been there. I remember for years spending time in labs and overseeing, automation of testing of software and things like that, and not really liking the job very much. But it was a job, and it paid the bills, and it forced me to gain skills and discipline that didn't come to me naturally at the time. So important to pay your dues. Also, I would add, when I look at executive management, I'm doing this from a perspective now, when I look at an executive management team and I see those that flourish and do well, I see those that got there for one reason or another and struggle. And I've come to realize that part of the reason is I've come to call it a difference between what I call hard skills and soft skills. If you reach an executive position and you really don't have hard skills, and what I mean by that is a real discipline that you've gone through and learned and become really good at. And I don't really care what that is. Maybe that's IT, maybe that's finance, maybe it's law. It can be in a number of areas. But if you don't come at it with some real definite skills, and the skills that you have are soft skills. Maybe you just were a great communicator and a great networker and great at selling yourself, and now you're also in this position. You'll struggle. The depth isn't there to handle the real fires. The judgment sometimes suffers. The discipline sometimes isn't there that's necessary to be effective as an executive manager.
Boy, there are a lot of nuggets in what you just said. So I want to jump here a little bit and get into some things. You shared some components of your leadership journey, and what do you think stands out most to you in terms of just your own personal experiences? You probably had some successes that are wonderful to reflect on. You probably had some, what we might think of as failures that you hopefully turned into successes, or at least learned from. Is there anything you can share in that?
Oh yeah, there's been many of both, and over the years. And when I think of what might have been considered an epic failure, there's one that comes to mind earlier on in my managing career. I know we're talking about leadership here, but becoming a good manager is also very difficult to do. I'll just add here as a side note. In my career, I can probably count the number of really good managers I've known on my two hands, and that's about it, that are really good at managing people. It is not easy. Far easier to manage projects than it is to manage people. Far less complex in a lot of ways. But I remember once managing a large organization, and I had one manager that reported into me, and he was a gifted and skilled engineer, but lacked the humility sometimes to double check his decisions and so forth. And after costing the company some significant losses by making some bad decisions a number of times, I finally came to the conclusion that we needed to fire him. We'd have to let him go, as this was a repeat thing. This was the most difficult firing I had ever done. Other executives didn't even want to be in the building when it happened. They knew it was going to be ugly. Security was there. And when I fired this gentleman, he was purple with rage and left there certainly hating me, as I was the focal point of this, as much as you could probably hate a person. And I felt very badly about that. I spent the next 3 or 4 years consistently sending him letters. And he moved out of state, got another job somewhere else, and was doing fine. But I consistently was sending him these letters for 3 or 4 years, never a response, just always trying to see if we couldn't mend this. And one day I received a letter back from him. And it probably was 4 years later. And it was a very interesting letter expressing some of his feelings and thoughts of what had happened back during that day, and then expressing honest gratitude for my having fired him even.
Wow.
Because of what he had done, and talking about his perception, and he couldn't see beyond a certain perception at that time. And, I keep that letter today as one of my most treasured, items that I keep from my career. And relationships are everything, and it's worth the effort that it takes to salvage them. It's a small world, and it always comes back around to you.
That is a really interesting point. I want to zero in on something you said there. There are good managers of projects. So that's probably easier to manage. But there are very few good managers of people. If you think about the characteristics or the things that good people managers do, what do you mean by that, or what do you think makes a good people manager?
Well, the fundamental reason why it's more difficult, it's hard to find really good project managers too. That's a great skill. But people are dynamic. They're changing. They're looking at you and they're saying, you're responsible, some of them think, for my career and my advancing. And if I'm not, then it's your fault. And they bring family problems and things that are always going on the side. It's challenging. The best managers are those people that, one, can gain the respect of their people they're managing and their loyalty. Those are the best and most effective managers. As I've watched some of these managers and some of the things that make them successful, I've seen a few things that are consistent for sure. And one is they tend to treat everyone the same. They're going to treat, for example, a janitor that they run into pretty much the same as they treat an executive manager they run into in the hall, let's say. They don't differentiate up and down. They treat everyone the same. Respect is universal language. It just is. And when you respect people, anyone and everyone, boy, that goes across language barriers, that goes across cultural barriers, that goes across any kind of a person that you're dealing with and their background, no matter how different it might be. If they feel like you respect them, they're going to respect you. You got to get people's buy-in. They have to feel like they're part of the process. If they feel like they're just an object that is working and producing for you, you'll get a day's work out of them, but you won't get that exponential sort of thing that can be happening. Great managers get exponential results beyond just accomplishing what they're needing to and being asked to accomplish. They tend to form a group and a team that operates at a higher level because it's what people do when they're happy and satisfied with what they're doing.
That's another great observation. So let me ask you a kind of a hard question here. What do you do when you've done all that you know how to create a great team and yet you still got that one holdout? You cannot get that person's heart and mind to really contribute the way you just described. Have you ever had that?
Yeah, I have had that. It's rare, though, I will say. What happens is you develop a team of people, and if you have someone that's holding out like that, for whatever reason, just doesn't want to become part of that, the team will take care of it typically, or they will. It's a dynamic that will almost take care of itself. You don't have to necessarily be the bad guy. The team will help them to move on. Or they'll help themselves to move on eventually if you can develop that kind of power in people. I look back at different people that I've admired and studied over the years, and one of them's Steve Jobs, the founder of Apple Computers. And if you study Steve Jobs' life, you learn a lot of things about him. He could be very abrasive. He sometimes he didn't do well with executive management, of course, but the thing that he consistently again and again and again excelled at is he had that ability to walk into a group of people, put his hand on their shoulder, point off into the distance, share a vision, and get them to help see it and buy into it and do things and perform in a way that just flat went beyond expectations. Steve Jobs didn't invent anything new, really. What he did was take existing great technology and then inspire others to package it in a manner that wasn't thought of maybe before. And he had that ability to get value out of people. There's few I can think of that were better at that than he was. Despite other weaknesses he might have had, he had incredible ability that way.
Shifting gears a little bit, I know you to be a very principled individual. So if you were to just share with our audience, what are one or two or three key principles that you live your life by?
Well, you have to be disciplined. You've got to be consistent. When you're starting up a company like doTERRA, for example, and it's grown very, very, very quickly, as you might imagine, every day there's fires. Every week, when you have a company that's a multinational company and doing as much business as doTERRA does, every week there is some crisis somewhere. Even in your building, there's always something that is like that. And what people need is they need that calming influence where you're not going to be rattled. You're not going to fly off the handle. You can't even afford to do that every once in a while. Well, you can, I suppose, but it will lessen your ability and your influence and trust. It's really all about trust. You hear that word integrity, and that integrity, it's overused. If I hear someone start to speak too much of integrity and use it too much, I become a little leery, a little watchful. It's something you should never have to mention yourself, ever. But it's something that you've got to exude, and you've got to just be disciplined in that way. As a leader, none of us are perfect. We all have weaknesses. We all have fallible, aspects. And yet you have to set a standard, and that can come in a lot of ways. If people know you care about them, that's going to help them to oversee a lot of your lacking areas, perhaps. But don't be fearful, and don't respond to fearful people. One of the things I learned years ago that I would say is one of the most helpful principles as you run into just the daily, weekly, yearly problems that are going to happen, some that might even appear to threaten your business from time to time, is avoid the temptation to put your strongest people on your biggest problems, your best people on your biggest problems, because it's a real temptation to do it, because they will solve your problem. Always put your best people on your greatest opportunities, and that's how you're going to grow a billion-dollar company, is by putting your very best people on your best opportunities. Problems will always be there, and you'll have to deal with them. You'll have to solve them. But if you consistently can stop yourself from that temptation of taking a known performer that is going to take this heat off your back, which is certainly a relief, and discipline yourself enough to keep that known performer and trusted person on your greatest opportunities, you're going to grow your business. You're going to grow it 10 times faster, and you just deal with the problems in other ways.
That is really great insight. I am so glad you shared that. So, David, one last question, and this is really for budding entrepreneurs or individuals interested in learning a little bit more about doTERRA and how they can become part of the doTERRA family. What thoughts do you have for us in that regard?
Well, first in regard to your budding entrepreneurs, don't skip steps in your life and in your development, because if you do, and you do have an opportunity to get into an executive management position of significance, you will regret it, because you'll be missing pieces that the others will not be missing, and you will know it, that you're lacking. And so don't skip steps. Approach everything you do with passion. I don't care if it's the most mundane job. Make sure that your boss is going to be looking at you and just going, man, he's a great employee, or she's a great employee. And you want to be well thought of. Always be in that top 10% of a company or of a business that is always looked about. This is one of my top 10% players. Just do everything with passion. In regard to doTERRA, and I'm asked fairly frequently, why has it done what it's done? Why has it grown like it's grown? It's grown as fast as the fastest growing companies in the history of the United States. Apple and other companies like that were on the same exact trajectory. And it's extremely stable as a company and as a business. The reason for that, I think, is contained in a couple of things. One, that we have some products that are extremely effective, and we're very, very loyal to the purity of the essential oils, which is our primary product line. But we also have hit a couple of nerves that are compelling to people. One is our main demographic of people at doTERRA is a young mother between 30 and 40 years old with several children, and we know that very, very clearly. We also know that 90% of people who join doTERRA do so for the products, having no interest in the business, but they transition with interest in the business with time, because it becomes an easy thing for them to do. If we're going to penetrate a mainstream market population, we have to be able to educate and teach and exist in a manner that people get it, that they can get that and they can resonate with that. So that's been a lot of the reason, I think, for the growth. The other aspects is because we're a natural product and we have to source these essential oils from all over the world, 33 different countries in which 16, 18 of them are what you would consider extremely impoverished. And so we go in and we form these cooperative relationships, and we actually employ now literally thousands of people full-time around the world in some of the poorest countries in the world. We love that because we change their lives. We pay them a lot more than they're normally getting because we push the brokers out of the way and we deal directly with these individuals. And then we bring our philanthropic entity, Healing Hands, in on top of that. We build the schools and we build the medical clinics and water systems, whatever is needed to help support these people and their children. And so it becomes a very powerful engine of doing good. What honestly allows us to do that, without any doubt, is the market. We bring the market. We bring huge demand. And when you bring that, then you have the ability and honestly the power to go in and do these other things in a very effective manner, because simply we bring the market, which in these poor countries, that's generally what they're lacking.
Well, thank you, David. This has been a remarkable interview, and your observations and your points are going to be very valuable for many people. So thank you for taking the time with us.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure to be with you this morning.
Thank you for listening to our Leaders 24/7 podcast. We want to know what you think. Please email us at feedback@leaders247.com. If you have follow-on questions for any of our guests, let us know and we will get answers and post the replies. Please remind your friends and family to check us out at www.leaders247.com or find us on iTunes. Leaders 24/7 is all about bringing the best content possible to anyone trying to become a leader or become a better leader. At Leaders 24/7, we like to recommend books. In this podcast, I recommend you check out my book on Selling to Business. Selling to Business is a self-help book designed to create authentic, long-lasting, powerful, and profitable associations. Anyone who is responsible for developing and maintaining relationships, whether internal or external to their organization, will find this book full of quick and valuable suggestions. While this book focuses on how to get started in enterprise selling, the lessons shared give practical clues and examples of how to lead, how to develop, and how to interact with people for an authentic leadership experience. If you want to sharpen how you achieve your goals, how you prioritize time with leaders, how you take advantage of your executive time when you get it, or how to continue to develop your talents, Selling to Business is a good source and a quick read. I will include a 30% discount code in our podcast notes. At Leaders 24/7, we maintain a list of books on our website that have been recommended by our guests. If you like a reading suggestion from one of our guests, start your purchase with us by visiting our website. That way, we receive the benefit of revenue sharing through Amazon's affiliate program, which allows us to continue to bring great content to you. Tune in for our next podcast where we feature another interview with an insightful leader.